A very good evening to you. We're so happy to have you here this evening for this presentation of Walk Her Way, New York City, a walking guide to women's history with Jana Mader. Now, before I introduce our esteemed guests, my name is William Roca. I'm the Director of Programs here at Village Preservation. And if this is the first time you are attending a Village Preservation program, if you could just spare me a couple of minutes, I just want to tell you a little bit about Village Preservation. We were founded back in 1980, and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural, cultural, and historic heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped secure landmark designation for more than 1,300 buildings in our neighborhoods, and we host more than 80 free programs like this throughout the year. Now, if you're interested in supporting the work that we do and maybe even becoming a member, we are a members-based organization, so your support is absolutely critical. And if you're interested, please go ahead and scan that QR code that you see on the screen there. Otherwise, just head over to villagepreservation.org, learn a little bit more about the advocacy work that we do, our other great programs that we have on offer. And also, just so you know, that one of the benefits of becoming a member is that you get first dibs to register for all our programs. And we also have special members programs throughout the year as well. So we very much hope you would consider becoming a member. Now, whether you decide to become a member or not, I do highly recommend when you visit our website, please do check out our digital resources. We have an amazing array of virtual resources free to use. These include digital maps that you can explore and learn more about the neighborhood. You can build your own walking tour from the comfort of your seat while you're on your computer. Learn about all the amazing people and places in our neighborhood, which we're going to learn a little bit more about this evening. I also highly recommend that you check out our oral history archive. We have dozens and dozens of oral histories of people sharing their amazing experiences in life within the neighborhoods. So please go ahead and check those out and listen to them. And also, I highly recommend our image archive as well. We have over 5,000 images, many, many donated by supporters over the years, documenting life in our neighborhoods throughout the decades. Really, really cool, amazing stuff, free to use whether you decide to become a member or not. Now, just to let you quickly know about some of our other upcoming programs, on the 27th of January, we have 60 years of landmark designations. Has the golden age of preservation in New York City ended? Well, I sure hope not, but if you want to find out, please tune in there on Tuesday, January 27th. This is also a virtual program. So please go to the website, villagepreservation.org/events, and you can register for that program for free. Now, before I introduce our guests for this evening, just some quick Zoom protocol. This is a Zoom webinar, so your cameras and microphones will be off throughout this evening's presentation, but that does not mean we do not want to hear from you. So at any point during Jana's presentation this evening, please feel free to submit a question to the chat or the Q&A feature. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Jana Mader, our guest for this evening. She is Director of Academic Programs at the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities at Bard College. She received her PhD in Comparative Literature from the University of Munich and is taught at the University of North Carolina at Asheville and the Juilliard School. Her research focuses on 19th century literature and art, women writers of the 19th century, and environmental humanities. Her first novel was published in Germany in 2018, and as a scholar and writer, she works at the intersection of theory and practice, and she lives in New York. So, Jana, a very good evening and welcome to you. I'm
Thank
going to
you so
stop
much,
sharing,
Julian.
and I'm going to
Thank
hand it
you.
over to you and disappear.
Thank you so much, William. Thank you to the Grand Village Preservation Society for having me. I am going to share my screen with you before we get started. Let's see. And I am going to turn on the slideshow. And I see it is loading. Here we are. Good evening, everyone. I am very excited to share a book with you tonight on this very cold evening, January evening. It's dark outside and hopefully cozy where you are. I'm in upstate New York. I teach at Bard College. It's about 2 hours north of New York City, and it was really wonderful to see where you are all located. I think most of you are in New York City, and the book that I'm going to introduce to you tonight, or maybe you already know it, it came out last year, is called Walk Away New York City, and it's walking tours through New York. And I'm going to share a little bit more about the book with you first, and then I'm going to take you on a Greenwich Village walk and share some buildings with you and some women from the book. And there's over 200 women in Walk Her Way, and we have 10 walks, all in New York City. Most of them are in Manhattan, and we also have a Brooklyn walk. And I can show you real quick just the different maps because we have so many visitors from you from different areas. So here you can see we're in East Village, Chelsea, SoHo. That's where we have walks. And so, like I said, this book came out, maybe just go back for a minute. This book came out last year with Hardy Grant. And my co-author, Kaitlyn and I had been working on it for, I say, 3 or 4 years. And it really grew out of our own travels and explorations and walking cities and the wish to have a book that you can just put in your pocket and take with you easily. It's a really nice size. You don't need your phone. You don't have to look up directions. All the directions are given in the book. And explore a city through a group of people that are possibly not in the usual travel guides. We discovered a lot of women that are behind big landmarks that are not usually mentioned, but then other women also very celebrated, like Billie Holiday. So those are in the book too. And we hope you'll find some familiar writers and poets and activists, and then maybe also discover a new poet or a new dancer or a new a nurse that helped build a hospital in New York City. So all kinds of backgrounds. And we started walking New York City in 2019. I came from North Carolina. I moved to New York, and I love walking in New York. It's a very walkable city, I think, even though it's very big. And what excites me most about this book is that these walking tours take you to corners that you would otherwise not visit if you would go to a landmark and just go directly to the landmark and then take the subway to a different landmark or a historic site. And so, especially with people who are visiting, or if you just moved to the city, or if there's a neighborhood that you are not very familiar with, I have a lot of friends that bought the book that live in New York City, and they walked some of the walks and were like, oh, I discovered like a lot of like women from my neighborhood that I didn't know about. I didn't know that in this building, this writer wrote this book, and now I passed the building and it has a entirely different meaning. And that's really what it is. It's giving space meaning and changing our perception about the spaces that we're in. And so, like I said, we have 10 walks. All of them have about 10, 15 stops. They take 2, 3 hours, but they can be shortened. Sometimes there's a museum, sometimes, galleries, things you can extend, where you can stay for a while if you want to, or you can just read about the architect, Maya Lin, for example, and then keep on walking. So I'm really excited to share a little glimpse into the Greenwich Village walk. It's a big walk. There's a lot in Greenwich Village. So I just picked some women that I thought could be really interesting for tonight. And then we can also have a little discussion and conversation about possibly other stops. So let's see, I'm gonna click. Yes, this is the book. And just one more last thing before we get started on our walking tour. The illustrations are by an illustrator named Aja Hans. She's a friend, just like Kaitlyn. So it was really wonderful to make this book with two of my best friends. And I am very excited to share the maps with you and the illustrations she made, because I think they really bring the book to life. We knew that this is not going to be a textbook. So having maps makes a huge difference. And like I said, you don't even need your phone, because you can just follow the directions. And here you can see the Greenwich Village map. I'm going to Greenwich Village within New York City. I have a script, so I'm going to read a little bit because I don't want to get lost. I could just like talk about this book for hours. I want to make sure I stay under ideally 45 minutes. And then afterwards, yeah, if you want to take notes and ask questions, that's great. We can have a more casual discussion. So to start us, I want to talk a little bit about women in Greenwich Village and the village as a refuge for those who didn't fit mainstream expectations, a place where women could love openly, and a place where women organized, rode, and protested. And here we have some historic photos of Washington Square Arc that's in our book, and an important stop in Washington Place. And I'm just going to go back. Greenwich Village as a refuge for those who didn't fit mainstream expectations. For women who didn't conform to gender roles, sexual norms, racial boundaries, or social class expectations, the village offered refuge. It wasn't utopian or easy, but was more forgiving than most places. Boarding houses, cafes, clubs, and shared apartments became informal networks of support. Women who were unmarried, queer, politically radical, or simply unconventional could exist here with less scrutiny. The village became a place where difference was not only tolerated, but at times quietly sustained. Greenwich Village is also a place where women could love openly. The village has long been associated with freedom of expression, and that included love. For women whose desires fell outside heterosexual norms, the village offered relative openness, bars, salons, friendships, and there's actually a lot of salons in Greenwich Village, and that I found during the research process especially exciting, because they were operating in secret, and that was really cool to learn more about those. Friendships and chosen families where relationships could exist with less fear. Love here was often coded, sometimes hidden, but also sustains. The streets and rooms of the village held relationships that history often overlooked, yet which shaped lives, art, and movement. The village is a place where women organized, rode, and protested. Greenwich Village was not only a place of personal freedom, it was a place of collective action. Women organized labor movements, suffrage campaigns, peace protests, and civil rights efforts here. They wrote in kitchens, in cafes, published in small presses, argued in meeting rooms, and marched in the streets. You all already know this. The village allowed ideas to circulate quickly between apartments, bookstores, coffee houses, and street corners, turning private conviction into public action. And with that, I am going to give you a quick overview of the stops that we are going to make tonight. The Cafe Society is our starting point. And then we're going to the home of Lorraine Hansberry, Washington Square Park. And we have quite a lot of homes, as you probably know, in Greenwich Village, of incredible writers. And someone like Marianne Moore, you may know, but maybe not Mine Ukubo. And then we also have Mabel Dodge Luhan, Emma Lazarus, and then we're going to end with the Jefferson Market Library and Women's House of Detention, which I'm sure you also know. Those who live in New York, I'm sure. It's quite the landmark. Here's a little bit of a zoomed in map. You can see that the actual walk has 13 stops. And you can also see that it's a nice loop. Most of our walks are loops, and it gives you direction on how to get to the first stop. And like I said, here you can see you can shorten the loop if you want to, and you can go skip a couple stops if you feel like just going for an hour. or you can do the whole, turn it into all day exploration. And this is one of the illustrations from our illustrator, Cafe Society, and we're starting with Sheridan Square Garden. Number 1 is the address. Standing here across from Sheridan Square Garden, the plain white brick building gives little indication of what once happened inside. Architecturally modest and deliberately and flashy, Cafe Society opened here in 1938, founded by Barney Josephson, who imagined a nightclub radically different from anything New York has seen before. Located in a basement space, the club was intentionally designed to feel intimate rather than glamorous. Low ceilings, closed tables, no hierarchy between performers and audience. Most importantly, it was the first racially integrated nightclub in New York City, operating under strict policy of no segregation, no discrimination, and no racist language. For women performers, this mattered deeply. And you can see here the former entrance to the building, and then a plaque that is now on the building, that a historic marker that reads that this was the first integrated nightclub in New York City. And here's a little bit bigger photo of the building. And in 1939, for example, Billie Holiday debuted Strange Fruit here, transforming the nightclub into a site of protest as much as performance. Another picture from the club inside. And in 1940, Sister Rosetta Tharpe took the stage, bringing her electrifying gospel-infused sound into a secular integrated space, collapsing boundaries between sacred and popular music, between Black church traditions and modern urban culture. And then I added something because I found it while I was preparing the PowerPoint presentation, and I thought that was really cool. It's not a woman, but it doesn't matter. I still wanted to share it with you because at roughly the same moment, just uptown, Pierre Mondrian, newly arrived in New York, was working on Victory Boogie Woogie, 1942 to 1944, and made this painting inspired by jazz movement and the pulsing grid of the city itself. So it's just a wonderful example of where music meets art, meets space, meets politics. So I included that painting. You may have seen it before. All right. That was our first stop onto the home of Lorraine Hansberry. The home is located on Waverly Place at 112. On this quiet stretch of Waverly Place, the mid-century brick townhouse blends seamlessly into the rhythm of the street, its unassuming facade broken only by a small red plaque that quietly honors an extraordinary presence. I am going to talk about the historic marker that you can see here on this brick building in just a second, because that fits perfectly with our program here tonight. Lorraine Hansberry, born in 1930, lived here in the 1950s, during a time when Greenwich Village offered rare space, both literal and intellectual, for a young Black woman writer to think, argue, and create. It was in this home that she worked on A Raisin in the Sun, which you maybe know, it's quite famous, and which opened on Broadway in 1959. And that play made Hansberry the first African-American woman to have a play produced on Broadway. So quite remarkable. And she lived in this building. And you have a beautiful photograph of her on the right side. And now here we have a close-up of the plaque. And you can read, maybe it's a little small here in the picture, but that this is from the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. So this is sponsored and put up on the building by the program here tonight by the Preservation Society. And it was quite wonderful when William and I started talking about doing an event, because I immediately remembered all the little illustrations from the book with the red plugs, and they stand out. It's nice. You immediately see the red from far away. And then once you start walking New York City, you like notice them, you see them. So here you can see the door of Lorraine Hansberry's building, and the red plug itself tells another part of the story. Installed by the Village Preservation Society in 2017, it recognizes Hansberry's life, work, and her deep connection to this neighborhood. It is one of many markers the society has placed throughout the village to make visible the women, artists, activists, and community builders whose contributions might otherwise be overlooked. In this way, preservation here is not just about the building's bricks or architecture. It's about memory, creativity, and the stories that continue to shape the village. Standing here, we see how a modest townhouse, a quiet street, and a small plaque together honor a woman whose work reshaped American theater and who walked these very sidewalks to make history. And I have a picture of the book for you, Raisin in the Sun. And we're on to Washington Square Park. In the book, this is stop 5. Washington Square Park, established in 1826, has long been at the heart of Greenwich Village's civic life, a place where public space meets public voice. Look around. Fountain glistening in the sun, the flowers edging the walkways, and the lively street musicians filling the air with music. The park's open plaza is framed by classical row houses and crowned by the iconic Washington Square Arch, a symbol of both celebration and protest. And I'm going to highlight 2 women with Washington Square Park. In the first one is Jane Jacobs. One of the most influential women connected to the space was Jane Jacobs. She was born in 1916 and passed away in 2006. As an urbanist and activist, she believed the life of the city could not be dictated from a distant office or a top-down plan. It had to be observed, experienced, and protected on the streets themselves. During the 1950s and 60s, when urban renewal threatened to reshape entire neighborhoods, including much of Greenwich Village, Jacobs led community campaigns right here. She fought to preserve the human scale of the streets, the small businesses, the walkable neighborhoods, the social networks that made the village vibrant. Standing in the park, it's easy to imagine her walking these same paths, taking notes, rallying neighbors, and listening to the city's pulse. And you have here a picture of her when she rallied with others in the village, and then the park on the left. In 1955, when a powerful city planner, Robert Moses, proposed driving a road straight through Washington Square Park, he encountered fierce opposition from one particularly determined local resident, Jane Jacobs. Jacobs understood that the park was not an empty space to be engineered, but the heart of village life. She organized neighbors, spoke at community meetings, like the one pictured here in 1963, and challenged Moses' top-down vision with a radical idea that cities thrive when they are shaped by the people who live in them. Her successful fight helped save Washington Square Park and secured her place as one of the most influential urban thinkers of the 20th century. Here is her most famous book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of Great American Cities, it was published in 1961, is more than a book. It's a manifesto for paying attention to the life of the streets. Written from her experiences living and walking in Greenwich Village, Jacobs challenged the prevailing urban planning ideas of her time, which favored large-scale redevelopment, highways cutting through neighborhoods, and sterile modernist designs. She argued that vibrant cities depend on diverse, mixed-use streets, small businesses, and the informal social networks that connect people. Jacobs emphasized the importance of eyes on the street, the way ordinary residents observing daily life maintain safety and community, and celebrated the subtle, complex patterns that made neighborhood thrive. For Greenwich Village, her work is a love letter as much as a warning. The village's charm, creativity, and resilience depend on the human-scale streets, the local shops, and the people who lived and walked them, qualities she fought to preserve against sweeping urban renewal projects. I think we still feel that today, where sometimes chains take over and then the whole atmosphere of a street changes. And so, yeah, I'm always like, even here in upstate New York, in these small towns, we have to remind ourselves that these cute towns are cute because of the small businesses and the sidewalks. And so I see Jane Jacobs very much in that. But Washington Square Park is not only a place of preservation and protest, it is also a space that gathers the echoes of earlier struggles for justice. Long before Jane Jacobs stood here challenging urban renewal, working women filled this park to demand safer conditions, fair wages, and dignity. That brings us to another pivotal moment in the village history, and to the lives lost in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, an event that transformed labor law in the city and this country. We have here a photograph of garment workers in New York City, most of them young immigrant women. In the early 20th century, Greenwich Village and nearby Lower Manhattan were bustling centers of garment production, with factories packed into tenements and lofts. One of the largest was the Triangle Waist Company, where approximately 500 workers, mostly young women, produced ladies' blouses under grueling conditions. The majority of these workers were recent Jewish and Italian immigrants between the ages of 16 and 23, who had come to the city seeking opportunity but found long hours, low pay, unsafe workplaces instead. Many had left their families behind in Europe, and the factory became both a source of income and a fragile community where friendships and shared stories and dreams of independence helped them endure exhausting days. It was in this crowded, high-pressure environment that the conditions were most dangerous. Narrow aisles, locked doors to prevent theft or early departures, inflammable materials stacked in cramped spaces. The factory and its workforce embodied both the hope and the peril of urban industrial life. And it was this environment that made the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire one of the deadliest industrial disasters in American history. On March 25 in 1911, tragedy struck. A fire broke out on the top floors of the Triangle Waist Company building, and the factory's dangerous conditions turned deadly. Locked exit doors, narrow stairways, and flammable materials created a deadly trap. In just 18 minutes, 146 workers, mostly young immigrant women, lost their lives, many jumping from windows to escape the flames. The streets of the city, including nearby Greenwich Village, were filled with the screams of the trapped and the shock of witnesses. The fire sent a wave of grief and outrage through New York and the nation, exposing the brutal realities of sweatshop labor and the urgent need for reform. And here on the right side, we see Rose Schneiderman. One of the most powerful voices in the aftermath was Rose Schneiderman. She was born in 1882, passed away in 1972. And she was a labor leader and a suffragist who had long been organizing garment workers. Schneiderman took to public speaking, famously telling the audiences, "The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too." She demanded safer working conditions, stronger labor laws, and the right for women to organize and be heard. Her leadership helped push reforms in labor protections, fire safety codes, and workplace inspections. Standing here in Washington Square Park, it's striking to imagine women like Schneiderman rallying neighbors, holding speeches, and mobilizing communities in public spaces that were central to both everyday life and civic activism. The park served as a stage for voices that demanded change, shaping the village and the nation through courage, organization, and relentless advocacy. And you can see here another historic marker, the brown building at 23 to 29 Washington Place, formerly the Ash Building, where the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire occurred, was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1991. On the building, you can find a square bronze plaque indicating this designation, signifying its national historic importance. In Washington Square Park, the architecture, open space, and early rhythms of life are inseparable from the history of civic engagement and activism. And on to a home. Marianne Moore lived on 35 West 9th Street. And we have a picture of her and a picture of the building. On this quiet stretch of West 9th Street stands a 19th century brownstone townhouse, modest yet dignified, a perfect home for a poet who valued precision as much as presence. Here lived Marianne Moore. She was born in 1887, passed away in 1972. She was the modernist poet and editor whose works, including observations and collected poems, won her the Pulitzer Prize and earned her a central place in American literature. One can almost imagine the click-clack of a typewriter echoing down the narrow stairwell as Moore worked late into the night, shaping poems with meticulous attention to rhythm, syllables, and sound. Her poetry often focused on animals, objects, and the natural world, revealing beauty and complexity in the smallest details. And another historic marker, similar to the one we just saw. It reads, Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, baseball enthusiast, and lifelong New Yorker, Marianne Moore. Her apartment, the apartment we just saw, lives on in an unexpected way. It has been meticulously recreated at the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia. The replication preserves not just the layout of her rooms, but the atmosphere of her working life, the furniture, the arrangement of objects, and even details like the mantelpiece from her home, which once framed her daily view. For Moore, space mattered. She believed that careful arrangement of words, of rooms, of objects shaped thought itself. Seeing her apartment reconstructed reminds us that her poetry was not only written at a desk, but composed within a carefully curated domestic world, one where attention, order, and observation govern both art and life. I thought that was really beautiful to see the space from inside and see it preserved with all the little objects. So I included a couple more photos here from the living room. Moore's brownstone was more than a place to live. It was a space of careful observation, quiet reflection, creativity, shaped as deliberately as her poems. Inside, she surrounded herself with carefully collected objects, natural specimens, books, curiosities, items she studied with the same precision she brought to her verse. Outside, the steady rhythms of the village life moved along. Inside, language was measured, examined, and arranged. Standing here in front of the building, you can sense how the calm of the street and the intimacy of her home created the ideal environment for a poet whose work depended on close attention to the world. And you just read it already in the historic marker, but Marianne Moore was a huge baseball fan. She was a Yankees fan. And she wrote poetry about baseball too. Here we have an excerpt from Baseball and Writing. This is a really great picture of her. She's 81 in it. Marianne Moore was famously devoted to baseball, a passion that might seem surprising until you consider her eye for detail and form. She admired the game's precision, rhythm, and bursts of unpredictability, once writing that baseball was the one game in which the bat and the ball are almost equal antagonists. For Moore, the sport offered the same satisfactions as poetry: pattern, tension, surprise, and grace under pressure. And another home, not as famous, not as known, Mabel Dodge Lujan on 23rd Fifth Avenue. So maybe I can introduce you to a new person. At 23rd Fifth Avenue, this brownstone with its larger parlor windows was once the home of Mabel Dodge Lujan. She was born in 1879 and passed away in 1962. And she was a powerful patron of the arts and one of the most influential cultural connectors in early 20th century New York. And we have a photo of the inside of her apartment as well preserved here in this archival photograph. In the 1910s, Dodge transformed her home into a gathering place for writers, artists, and thinkers, using her resources and social reach to support modernist work and foster dialogue across disciplines. These rooms became a crossroads of the New York avant-garde, where ideas moved freely between literature, art, music, and politics. Standing here today, it's hard to imagine how charged the space once was, but for a crucial moment, this address helped shape the cultural life of Greenwich Village and beyond. Another picture of Mabel. In the second decade of the 20th century, Mabel Dodge was known internationally as the New Woman, a term used to describe women who rejected traditional roles in favor of intellectual independence, sexual autonomy, and public influence. The New Woman moved through the world with confidence. She hosted salons, shaped political conversations, supported experimental art, and claimed authority over her own life. Dodge embodied this ideal not simply through her writing or her opinions, but through action, using her home, her wealth, and her social position to create spaces where ideas could challenge convention. In Greenwich Village, the New Woman was not an abstraction. She was visible, vocal, and central to the cultural life of the neighborhood. Her gatherings here in Greenwich Village were legendary. Everyone knew about it. Drawing writers, artists, and thinkers into evenings of spirited conversation, poetry readings, and music. Dodge's energy and vision extended far beyond the village. In the 1930s, she commissioned an extraordinary villa in Taos, New Mexico, creating a new hub for artistic and intellectual exchange. Around 1938, she was photographed there on D.H. Lawrence's porch with Frida Lawrence and Dorothy Brett, a moment that captures her enduring commitment, fostering creativity and connection wherever she went. She also knew Georgia O'Keeffe, who also was drawn to this landscape in New Mexico. And another, an illustrator artist that is not as famous today, home of Mine Okubo. And she lived on 17 East 9th Street and was quite a remarkable life that I'm going to summarize for you. And I share her most important work and that she also completed and finished in this building. She's best known for Citizen 13660. And we stand in front of East 9th Street now, an early 20th century townhouse, modest in appearance yet profoundly connected to a remarkable life of art, resilience, and witness. Mine Okubo, she was born in 1912 and passed away in 2001, lived and worked here, sketching and creating in solitude while observing the world around her with precision and empathy. Okubo is best known for her memoir, Citizen 13660, a groundbreaking work of visual and written documentation that recounts her experience as a Japanese American interned during World War II. One can imagine her quietly carrying a sketchbook down these streets, translating ordinary moments into art, while also reflecting on the extraordinary events that shaped her life. Okubo, Citizen 13660, named for the number assigned to her family unit during internment, is a remarkable work of visual storytelling, comprising nearly 200 drawings with accompanying captions. Created during and after her release from incarceration, it depicts daily life at the Tanforan Assembly Center in San Bruno, California, and the Topaz War Relocation Center in central Utah, all through her own perspective. The drawings capture both the mundane routines and the moments of resilience, humor, and humanity that sustained internees under extreme circumstances. Through her art, Okubo transformed personal experience into testimony, allowing readers to witness history with clarity, empathy, and immediacy. Standing here in her East 9th Street townhouse, it's striking to imagine the contrast from the quiet streets and solitude of the village home to the constrained spaces of the camps. Yet in both settings, she observed keenly and recorded with unwavering attention. And this is a scene from the book, and then a couple more, and the book cover. While still at Topaz War Relocation Center, Nina Okubo's art began to attract attention outside the barbed wire. Her drawings were published in Check, the camp's literary and arts magazine. In one sketch, a drawing of a camp guard, won a prize in the San Francisco Art Show and was featured in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1943. Editors at Fortune magazine saw her work and were impressed by both its skill and its human testimony. So they hired Okubo as an illustrator for a special issue of Fortune, and this opportunity became her ticket out of the camp. With Fortune's support, including helping her find a studio apartment in Greenwich Village, Okubo left Topaz in January 1944 and moved to New York City to take up her assignment, reclaiming her freedom and continuing her artistic career. And you can see here the Citizen Indefinite Leave card. And these images show the stretch of East 9th Street from 3 to 21 with 17 East 9th Street. The home we're focusing on is the 8th from the left. And in this quiet townhouse, like I said, she completed Citizen 13660, though she eventually moved to another apartment. This part of Village remained home for the rest of her life. She continued to live, work, and create in New York until her death in 2001 at the age of 88, and leaving behind a body of art and writing that preserves the memory of both personal and collective resilience. And I have one more painting here, Wind and Dust, a watercolor that she made. And onto the last home for tonight, Emma Lazarus on 18 West 10th Street. On this quiet townhouse street, a mid-19th century brick home once sheltered Emma Lazarus. She was born in 1849 and passed away in 1887. She was very young. The poet whose words would become immortalized on a Statue of Liberty. Inside these walls, Lazarus wrote with both lyric precision and moral urgency, advocating for Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution and imagining a land of refuge and freedom. You can picture her at a desk, pen in hand, listening to the gentle rhythm of the street outside while composing poems that spoke to justice, hope, and the promise of a better life. Her most famous work, The New Colossus, with the lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," has inspired generations of immigrants and shaped the national imagination of liberty. Standing here today, the townhouse is quiet witness to the power of words and to a woman who used the poetry to give voice to the voiceless. And you can see it's a really beautiful, beautiful home. Another picture. And she was born into a wealthy family. She was born in, like I said, in 1849 into a well-established Jewish family in New York City, and grew up in an environment that valued literature, education, intellectual life. And she was privately educated, studying languages. She spoke German, French, Latin, read classical literature, and began writing poetry at a young age, quickly gaining recognition with elite literary circles. In the final years of her life, Lazarus became deeply engaged with Jewish identity and the plight of Eastern European Jewish refugees fleeing persecution. She died very tragically young in 1887 at the age of 38, most likely from a form of blood cancer, leaving behind a body of work whose influence far outlived her short life. And I have a photo of a manuscript, the manuscript, The New Colossus, for you here. Here we see the original manuscript of Emma Lazarus and New Colossus alongside the blue plaque on her home, installed by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The manuscript reminds us that these words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," were inspired both by her literary craft and her deep commitment to social justice. The plaque serves as a public marker of her legacy. Connecting passersby to the woman who not only shaped American poetry, but also helped define the moral imagination of the nation. And this manuscript is now held in the archives of the American Jewish Historical Society at the Center for Jewish History in New York City. And this collection includes Lazarus' manuscript notebook, and that contains this poem. And we're doing pretty good on time, I think. I have one more stop, which is a little bit of a bigger stop, but that gives us a little bit of time for question conversation too. Jefferson Market Library and Women's House of Detention. You might know the building. You live in New York on 425th 6th Avenue. It's probably the most beautiful library building I've ever seen. Here it is. The building that now houses the Jefferson Market Library has a rich and layered history. Originally constructed as a Jefferson Market courthouse, it serves as a judicial district courthouse from 1874 to 1877, presiding over trials and civic matters in Greenwich Village. Since 1967, it has been a branch of the New York Public Library, transforming from a site of legal authority into a center for learning, community, and access to knowledge. Its striking Victorian Gothic architecture, the prominent clock tower and ornate detailing, makes it one of the village's most iconic landmarks, reflecting both the neighborhood's history and its ongoing commitment to public engagement. Some archival photos. In 1927, the original jail, market, and firehouse at Jefferson Market were demolished to make way for the city's only house of detention for women. By the time it opened in 1931, the adjacent courthouse had become specialized, hearing only cases with female defendants. Women's House of Detention operated for 4 decades, closing in 1971 before being demolished in 1974, leaving space for a garden that we can still see today. This transformation from site of incarceration to a public space, to a public green space, reflects the village's history of reinvention and the way spaces once associated with punishment and control were reclaimed for community and reflection and life. I think this is just such a beautiful metaphor. Here's the garden. And I want to share, of course, a woman with you with the site. In October 1970, activist, scholar, and abolitionist Angela Davis was arrested by the FBI in connection with the Marin County courthouse incident, was held at the Women's House of Detention here at Jefferson Market. Her imprisonment drew international attention and sparked a massive Free Angela Davis movement with rallies, letters, and protests demanding her release. Though she was ultimately acquitted of all charges, Davis' detention highlighted the intense political repression faced by women of color and radical activists during this period. Standing here today, where a jail once stood and a garden now grows, we are reminded that Greenwich Village has long been a site where struggles for justice, freedom, and transformation have played out in public view. And I just want to show you the garden picture one more time, because again, I think it's such a beautiful symbol. The Jefferson Market Garden offers a striking contrast to the site's past, where once stood the Women's House of Detention in space of confinement and surveillance. Now blooms a lush public garden, open to all and filled with flowers, trees, and quiet paths. The transformation of the space reflects the village's long history of reclaiming and reinventing public spaces, turning sites of restriction into places of community, reflection, and life, a reminder that the neighborhood continues to evolve while preserving the stories of the women who shaped it. And here is the map again from the book, the whole walk. through Greenwich Village. You can see maybe in the legend, maybe it's a little small, but um, the actual walk ends at Stonewall Inn. And you can see in between there's a church that we highlight and a couple more stops. And here's the book cover one more time. Thank you very much. I'm going to put a couple of links, if I can, William, in the chat. Like I have a Substack on walking and a website and a newsletter if anyone wants to stay in touch, but there is no rush. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to end my screen share.
All right. Thank you, Jana, so much. I'm gonna share the link to the website of the book,
Oh, thank
walkherway.com,
you.
in the chat. So yeah, folks, that I just shared the link in the chat. You'll be able to learn more about the book and go and purchase the book, which I highly recommend because it is just such a lovely, beautiful little book. So if you have questions, please go ahead and pop those into the chat in the Q&A. But I would love to kick off the discussion is as an academic, you get to work on books and articles and do really, really in-depth research on all these amazing women that have lived and worked and done all these incredible things, not just in our neighborhoods, but across New York City. Why do you feel putting this book together, a walking tour book, like why do you think walking tours are so important to help people
Mm,
connect with the lives of these women?
that's a great question. Um, because, looking back, things look always like much more straight than they actually were. And we did have this idea in the beginning, but it wasn't like we sat down, we're like, oh, let's make a book that's called Walk Her Way. And we have 10 walks in the book, and they're along women's history. Um, we started walking. I'm both a walker. I walked uh, in all kinds of places. I grew up in Germany, and I was fortunate to have a place to live close to trails and streets, and it helps me clear my mind and gather my thoughts. So walking when I go visit a new city or town, like the first thing I try to do is walk. And like I said, even in New York City, when I worked at Juilliard, I would commute down from the Hudson Valley and I would take the train and then I would walk up to 63rd just because like walking in New York City is the absolute best. Um, so there was already that the walking practice that it's a really beautiful connection with creativity and writing, like stepping away from the written work, going out, walking, and um, so many beautiful poems and writings on walking. I must say, this is like a whole nother topic. But so the walking aspect had been with me for a long time, and and then while we were doing this research. I also love maps. I think maps are really cool. I'm such a map nerd. And so we quickly knew that if we want to find these stories from women, we want to curate them into a map. So that map and the walking, that was an idea that was quickly came together. But for a moment, because we didn't have a publishing house right away, I've had published some books, but my publishing houses were in Germany, and so we did this all like evening work, weekend work, and so we wanted to make it accessible to people and just share this with you because we were both so excited about it. It was a really nice. Uh, Academic, I love doing research and I like doing my more scholarly work, but this was a really nice balance to that where we just had so much fun and we were so eager to share it. So we actually thought about making a website first and people can access. But and then we had a podcast actually for a little while and shared stories of women working today and how. So the big question was always, how does the space you live in shape your work and influence your work? And how did, in of the like, historic women, how did the space, how was it shaped by the women who worked there? Yeah, sorry, like I don't, am I answering your question,
Go
William?
ahead,
I
go.
don't know. But um um we quickly realized, I'm also a book person. Like we're all, I think, way too much on our phones and all a little tired of it. I can already actually feel it with my students who are 20, 25. I went back to handwriting only, and they kind of love it. We're all doing notebooks now,
Oh,
and we're going back to books. And so the paper format at some point was just like, okay, this needs to be paper format. This can't be a digital archive. We need to curate this into a book. So yeah, that was a really long answer to say that the different parts kind of like came to us over years. The Chinatown walk was our first one. And then we finished that one. And maybe I can share more about the other walks if there's questions about other walks. I don't want to take up too much time.
no, no, absolutely. Because that was the other question. This seems
Yeah.
like such an incredibly daunting task because just for me working here at Village Preservation for 2 years, I'm like, oh my goodness, how many amazing people live just in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And you and Kaitlyn decided to tackle Manhattan and New York City, which to me is overwhelming. So how did you go about building the walks and deciding what to include and unfortunately what you may have to not include this go around, but maybe there might be a sequel.
Yes. Actually, we already have enough material for book number two in New York. There's a conversation about turning this into a series with different cities, walk away Boston, walk
That
away
would be awesome.
Montreal, which could be really cool. Lots of walkable cities in the United States. But yeah, there's so much material. You're right. It's easy to get overwhelmed. Maybe it helped that I didn't grow up in New York. Because then like from the outside view, I think if I would have lived in Greenwich Village and just seen all of these sites every single day, I would have felt too overwhelmed and probably not done the book, to be honest with you. And so we had to take a step back and just look at it also from a really practical perspective and look at what works for a walk, right? Not everything works. And it was interesting because the first walk, we were at our desks for weeks and months putting this together. And then I'm not an illustrator and I'm not a graphic designer. So we just had like our little handwritten maps and ideas on different notes. And so my co-author, Caitlin Allen, she lives in North Carolina. That's where we met and started the book. And so I went down to New York and went to Chinatown, and it was actually a brutal January day. It was 30 degrees and really cold. But I walked the walk and it worked. And that was the first time when we were like, okay, we can turn this into a book. But you quickly, like we quickly learned how to navigate, how much distance between each stop, where do we need to look, how can we loop around, what's the neighborhood. So yeah, it's a little bit of like we had to drop some of the stops or women just because they didn't make it into a walk. And it just like didn't fit. So there was not, yeah, we only had the space for 10 walks because we also wanted to keep the book at a page size, page count where you can take it, right? It's like, it's a nice book that you can like put in your purse. It's not a thick, giant dictionary of like thousands of women. And so yeah, we were just like, okay, let's not be sad here. No hurt. We're just gonna move on, and this woman is gonna be in volume two, and the stop because it's an amazing stop. And then last thing I just gonna say with your question, really interesting too. For example, Harlem, right? We quickly realized without even planning on it that every neighborhood, and of course, like you all know, like living in New York City, how every neighborhood has a vibe and an energy. And we didn't even really plan to curate that energy into a walk. That was not the approach. We created the walk and then we noticed, oh yeah, like Chelsea feels very different from East Village. And, like SoHo and Midtown, of course, Midtown feels very different from Harlem. And so there was a moment because I work at the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College where I was like, yeah, well, Hannah Arendt lived in New York City. Like, I want to have Hannah Arendt in the book. And so she lived in Harlem on Riverside Park and on Riverside, close to, yeah, Riverside Park. And we had this beautiful Harlem map of like jazz musicians and singers and, Harlem Renaissance. And it had a very distinct vibe, and Hannah Arendt did not fit into that walk. So she is now placed somewhere else. But yeah, it wasn't like a logic putting it together. It's just like somehow all these different things came together, if that makes sense. It wasn't like planned that way.
No, I love it. The let they kind of develop organically and come
Yes,
together. Just that's
exactly.
really wonderful.
Yes.
So yeah, then this would be our final question for the evening. But yeah, please tell us a little bit more about some of the other walks in
Hmm.
the book and the neighborhoods that you decided to focus on.
Yeah, great. I can maybe give you a quick overview that we have a Brooklyn walk. We have a beautiful walk through Central Park, which was a hard one for directions because there's all these trails. But I think um, we were able to do it really beautifully and elegantly so that you know exactly where to walk, even though it doesn't, some trails don't have names. And you don't need your phone, and you can just take the book and go on a Central Park walk and learn more about. There's a lot of sculptors, women sculptors in Central Park that are not named. There is no markers. We just see the artwork, and often, we have the horses when you walk into Central Park, and men on horses, but those were made by women. And so, yeah, that is really interesting. And then also the preserving of green spaces that women had a lot of like connected to Jane Jacobs. There are some women that were connected with Central Park, saving Central Park from basically just like becoming a desert. And then Chelsea with that is another walk. Chinatown, like I said, I already shared a little bit about Chinatown as our first one. Yeah. Um, and then we actually turned East Village and oh God, now I'm blanking. We turned like the east into like an east side walk. And this is one of the ones that does not loop around, but it is like a really nice, like long walk from north to south. And it just worked really beautifully. And you can like even feel like the change from north to south, how yeah, the East Village and then the Lower East Side have like also a different vibe. But it's kind of cool to follow that path. And then of Greenwich Village, and I already mentioned Harlem too. And then the Midtown Walk is wild, but there's so much. There's so much. Um, and it's a great loop through, yeah, some of the big landmarks, but also some very hidden things. There's like busts of women in pots where there's like lots of plants, you can hardly see them. Um, so because Midtown is so hectic and busy, it's easy to overlook certain things like small markers and small artwork. So we're pointing some of those out. And then one, I must say, sometimes I get asked what's my favorite walk. It's just really hard to choose. Greenwich Village is because I'm a writer myself. So with all the writing women, very inspiring to me personally. And then another one, an unexpected one, is Roosevelt Island, which is a beautiful, beautiful loop around the island and really interesting history and a lot of women's history on there. And there are cats, and you get to take the tram, which has a beautiful view onto Manhattan, and and then you walk along the water. So on like a June day, like a little bit of a breeze, perfect day for Roosevelt Island. And then our last one is Soho.
Oh, that's that. I really love the Central Park one. I think because that sometimes you feel like that could be a little bit of a city. You're like, oh, it's the park, it's beautiful, but it kind of
Yeah,
gets overlooked for what all the amazing things and influences that it had. So thank you, Yana, so much
of course.
for sharing us and showing us through Greenwich Village and our amazing neighborhood. Folks, we'll include the link in the follow-up email so you can learn more about the book. Go out, buy the book and then go for a walk once the weather is a little better. So, but we might hope to have Yana back here in the coming months to actually lead us on a walk of our neighborhood. But Yana, again, a huge thank you for putting together the beautiful book and for presenting to us this evening. And to all of you that attended, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this evening. We love that you joined us here for this program, and we look forward to seeing you at future village preservation programs, including a possible walking tour once the weather gets nicer. But stay warm, everyone, and have a wonderful long weekend after tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, William. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.